Let's do that again.
Oh, it was so perfect.
Okay, one more time. Pretend that didn't happen. Good morning, loves. Good morning and good afternoon, my loves. How are you doing?
I was so happy. I was so happy
with my little introduction with the start today, and so the mic wasn't on. Hi, Flowdrax. Thank you so much for your bits, love, and welcome to a little corner. How are you? Good evening. Thank you, Flo. I was so happy with the start, and then no, the mic wasn't on. How are you doing, loves? Today we are going to continue to read a little book, Three Men in a Boat by Jerome Jerome. But I want to start with a grounding with a singing bowl. It feels like a good start. I'm gonna decrease the volume a little bit also on the music. Okay. Thank you so much for the bits, Flo. Have a lovely day, my friend. You may also ask for some singing bowls during the read as well, should you want to. Hi, Free Love. Hello, Lisa. How are you, loves? No readings today, Free. No readings today. Just reading aloud. We're reading a book. Readings, transparencies are on Fridays. Today's reading, we're gonna read a book today, love. No worries. No worries. How are you, Free? How are you doing? We just want to do the heart before we start. Have you been okay, love? I've seen on the news it's not the easiest in your area. Are you okay? You'll stay in Q2 next time, yeah? I'm so glad, Free. Okay. I've been thinking a lot about you, what I've seen on the news. Hello, Emma. Good morning, my love. Welcome in. I had such a perfect start to the stream. I did such a beautiful little singing bowl. And I sang a little welcome, and then the mic wasn't on. Ooh, it broke. It's a good start today. Of course, Free. Hello, my love. How are you? I'm gonna light some candles, pour some water, and we're gonna go right back into the read. Are the sound levels okay for you? I'm glad. Okay, I'm very ready today. I think it's all the candles, but I love them. So we'll keep them. We'll keep them. I think I'm gonna light even a third one. No, it's okay with two. Okay. So, last week we started to read Three Men in a Boat by Jerome Jerome. It is a classic And it says that Three Men in a Boat, perhaps the best loved comic novel of the Victorian era. It has a lot of comedy. I am reading it for the first time with you, so I'm experiencing this with you. It has a bit of a satire to it, but it is quite fun. We read the first 3 chapters last week, so we will be starting on chapter 4. We are following 4 friends. It's 3 men and a dog. And they are feeling tired and they're feeling ill. And they wonder it's gotta be because of all the hard work we've been doing. So they get together to think about something they can do to feel better. And they decide to go on the Thames in a little boat. And it's filled with anecdotes that is not that the narrator starts to think about with certain situations. And so far they've just discussed what to do, how to go about it, where they're going to sleep, are they going to set a tent up on the boat, or are they going to stay in inns, and what are they going to do. And it's quite a comedian little story. So going into the 4th chapter, we have still not set foot on the boat. But we are to discuss what we're gonna eat, I think. Yes, the food question. So that is where we are today. So I'm gonna have a little drink. And we'll get right back into it. I noticed last week I used to read a lot aloud. I played a lot of theatre and I did a lot of acting before, but it's been quite some years. So one thing that I noticed last week was how I am not too good with remembering the voices that I've made, that I given the different characters. So as we get into it and the more books we read, I'm sure that it's gonna go better and better. But I hope that you will enjoy, my loves. Alright. Chapter 4. Then we discussed the food question. George said, "Begin with breakfast." George is so practical. "Now, for breakfast we shall want a frying pan." Harry said it was indigestible, but we merely urged him not to be an arse, and George went on, "A teapot and a kettle and a myphiliad spirit stove." "No oil," said George with a significant look, and Harris and I agreed. We had taken up an oil stove once, but never again. It had been like living in an oil shop that week. It oozed. I never saw such a thing as paraffin oils to ooze. We kept it in the nose of the boat, and from there it oozed down to the rudder, impregnating the whole boat and everything in it on its way. And it oozed over the river and saturated the scenery and spoiled the atmosphere. Sometimes a westerly oily wind blew, and at other times an easterly oily wind, and sometimes it blew a northerly oily wind, and maybe a southerly oily wind. But whether it came from the Arctic snows or was raised in the waste of the desert sands, it came alike to us, laden with the fragrance of paraffin oil. And that oil oozed up and ruined the sunset. And as for the moonbeams, they positively reeked of paraffin. We tried to get away from it at Marlow. We left the boat by the bridge and took a walk through the town to escape it. But it followed us. The whole town was full of oil. We passed through the churchyard, and it seems as if the people had been buried in oil. Hello, travel writer. Oh, long time no see. Hi, my love. At the end of that trip, we met together at midnight in a lonely field under a blasted oak and took an awful oath. We had been swearing for a whole week about the thing in an ordinary mid-class way, but this was a swell affair. An awful oath never to take paraffin oil with us in a boat again. Except, of course, in case of sickness. Therefore, in the present instance, we confined ourselves to methylled spirit. Even that is bad enough. You get methylled pie and methylled cake, but methylled spirit is more wholesome when taken into the system in large quantities than paraffin oil. For other breakfast things, George suggested eggs and bacon, which were easy to cook, and cold meat, tea, bread and butter and jam. For lunch, he said, we could have biscuits, cold meat, bread and butter and jam, but no cheese. Cheese, like oil, makes too much of itself. It wants the whole boat to itself. It goes through the hamper and gives a cheesy flavor to everything in there. You can't tell whether you're eating apple pie or German sausage or strawberries and cream. It all seems cheese. There is too much order about cheese. I remember a friend of mine buying a couple of cheeses at Liverpool. Splendid cheeses they were, ripe and mellow, and with a 200 horsepower scent about them that might have been warranted to carry 3 miles and knock a man over at 200 yards. I was in Liverpool at the time, and my friend said that if I didn't mind, he would get me to take them back with me to London, as he should not be coming up for a day or two himself, and he did not think the cheeses ought to be kept much longer. Oh, with pleasure, dear boy, I replied, with pleasure. I called for the cheeses and took them away in the cab. It was a rumsug affair, dragged along by the knock-kneed broken window summerbills, which his owner, in a moment of enthusiasm during conversation, referred to as a horse. I put the cheeses on top, and we started off as a shamble that would have done credit to the swiftest steamroller ever built, and all went merry as a funeral bell until we turned the corner. There, the wind carried a whiff from the cheeses full on our steed. It woke him up, and with a snort of terror, he dashed off at 3 miles an hour. The wind still blew in his direction, and before we reached the end of the street, he was laying himself out at the rate of nearly 4 miles an hour, leaving the cripples and stout old ladies simply nowhere. It took 2 porters as well as the driver to hold him at the station, and I do not think they would have done it even then had not one of the men had the presence of mind to put a handkerchief over his nose and to light a bit of brown paper. I took my ticket and marched proudly up the platform with my cheeses, and the people falling back respectfully on either side. The train was crowded, and I had to get into a carriage where there were already 7 other people. One crusty old gentleman objected, but I got in, notwithstanding, and putting my cheeses up the rack, squeezed down with a pleasant smile, and said it was a warm day. A few moments passed, and then the old gentleman began to fidget. "Very close, Nia," he said. "Quite oppressive," said the man next to him. And then they both began sniffing, and at the third sniff, they caught it right on the chest and rose up without another word and went out. And then a stout lady got up and said it was disgraceful that a respectable married woman should be hurried about in this way, and gathered up the bag and 8 parcels and went. The remaining 4 passengers sat on for a while, until a solemn-looking man in the corner who, from his dress and general appearance, seemed to be belonging to the undertaker class, said it put him in a mind of a dead baby, and the other 3 passengers tried to get out the door at the same time and hurt themselves. I smiled back at the black gentleman and said I thought we were going to have the carriage to ourselves, and he laughed pleasantly and said that some people made such a fuss over a little thing. But even he grew strangely depressed after we'd started, and so when we reached Crewe, I asked him to come and have a drink. He accepted, and we forced our way into the buffet, where we yelled and stamped and waved our umbrellas for a quarter of an hour, and then a young lady came and asked us if we wanted anything. "What's yours?" I said, turning to my friend. "I'll have a half a cow's worth of brandy, neat, if you please, miss," he responded. And he went off quietly after he had drunk it and got into another carriage, which I thought mean. From Crewe, I had a compartment to myself, though the train was crowded. As we drew up at different stations, the people, seeing my empty carriage, would rush for it. "Hey, you are, Maria! Come along, plenty of room! All right, Tom, we're getting here!" they would shout. And then they would run along, carrying heavy bags, and fight round the door to get in first. And one would open the door and mount the steps and stagger back into the arms of the man behind him, and they would all come and have a sniff, and then drop off and squeeze into other carriages, or pay the difference and go first. From Euston, I took the cheeses down to my friend's house. When his wife came into the room, she smelled around for an instant. Then she said, "What is it? Tell me the worst." I said, "It's cheeses. Tom bought them in Liverpool and asked me to bring them up with me." And I added that I hoped she understood that it had nothing to do with me, and she said that she was sure of that, but she would speak to Tom about it when he came back. My friend was detained in Liverpool longer than he expected, and 3 days later, as he hadn't returned home, his wife called on me. She said, "What did Tom say about those cheeses?" I replied that directly they were to be kept in a moist place, and that nobody was to touch them. She said, "Nobody's likely to touch them. Had you smelled them?" I thought he had, and added that he seemed greatly attached to them. "You think you'd be upset," she queried, "if I gave a man a sovereign to take them away and bury them?" I answered that I thought he would never smile again. An idea struck her. She said, "Do you mind keeping them for him? Let me send them round to you." "Madam," I replied, "for myself I like the smell of cheese, and the journey the other day with them from Liverpool I shall ever look back on as happy ending to a pleasant holiday. But in this world we must consider others. The lady under whose roof I have the honor of residing is a widow, and for all I know, possibly an orphan too. She has a strong, I may say an eloquent objection to being what she terms put upon. The presence of her husband's cheeses in the house, of your husband's cheeses in her house, she would, I instinctively feel, regard as put upon. And it shall never be said that I put upon the widow and the orphan." "Very well then," said my friend's wife, rising. "All I have to say is that I shall take the children and go to an hotel until those cheeses are eaten. I decline to live any longer in the same house with them." She kept her word, leaving the place in charge of the charwoman, who, when after she should stand the smell, replied, "What smell?" and who, when taken close to the cheeses and told to sniff hard, said she could detect a faint odor of melons. It was argued from this that little Ingie could result to the woman from the atmosphere, and she was left. Hi, Blue. The hotel bill came to 15 guineas, and my friend, after reckoning everything up, found that the cheeses had cost him 8 and 6 pence a pound. He said he dearly loved a bit of cheese, but it was beyond his means, so he determined to get rid of them. He threw them into the canal, but had to fish them out again as the bargemen complained. They said it made them feel quite faint, and after that he took them one dark night and left them in a parish mortuary. But the coroner discovered them and made a fearful fuss. He said it was a plot to deprive him of his living by waking up the corpses. My friend got rid of them at last by taking them down to a seaside town and burying them on the beach. It gained the place quite a reputation. Visitors said they had never noticed before how strong the air was, and weak-chested and consumptive people used to throng there for years afterwards. Fond as I am of cheese, therefore, I hold that George was right in declining to take any. "We shan't want any tea," said George. Harry's face fell at this. "But we'll have a good round, square, slop-up meal at 7. Dinner, tea and supper combined." Harry's grew more cheerful. George suggested meat and fruit pies, cold meat, tomatoes, fruit and green stuff. For drink, we took some wonderful sticky concoction of Harris's, which he mixed with water and called lemonade. Plenty of tea and a bottle of whiskey, in case, as George said, we got upset. It seemed to me that George harpened too much on the getting upset idea. It seemed to me the wrong spirit to go about a trip in. But I'm glad we took the whiskey. We didn't take beer or wine. They are a mistake up at the river. They make you feel sleepy and heavy. A glass in the evening when you're doing a match round the town and looking at the girls is all right enough, but don't drink when the sun is blazing down on your head and you got hard work to do. We made a list of the things to be taken, and a pretty lengthy one it was before we parted that evening. The next day, which was Friday, we got them all together and met in the evening to pack. We got a big Gladstone for the clothes and a couple of hampers for the victuals and the cooking utensils. We moved the table up against the window, piled everything in a heap in the middle of the floor, and sat round and looked at it. I said I'd pack. I rather pride myself on my packing. Packing is one of those many things that I feel I know more about than any other person living. It surprises me, myself sometimes, how many of these subjects there are. I impressed the fact upon George and Harris and told them that they had better leave the whole matter entirely to me. They fell into the suggestion with a readiness that had something uncanny about it. George put on a pipe and spread himself over the easy chair, and Harris cocked his leg on the table and lit a cigar. This was hardly what I intended. What I had meant, of course, was that I should boss the job, and that Harris and George should potter about my directions. I pushed them aside every now and then with, "Oi! Oh, you! Here, let me do it. There you are, simple enough." Really teaching them, as you might say. Their taking it in the way they did irritated me. There is nothing does irritate me more than seeing other people sitting about doing nothing when I'm working. I lived with a man once who used to make me mad that way. He would loll on the sofa and watch me doing things by the hour together, following me round the room with his eyes wherever I went. He said it did him real good to look on at me, messing about, He said it made him feel that life was not an idle dream to be gaped and yawned through, but a noble task, full of duty and stern work. He said he often wondered how he could have gone on before he met me, never having anybody to look at while they worked. Now, I'm not like that. I can't sit still and see other men slaving and working. I want to get up and superintend and walk around with my hands in my pockets and tell him what to do. It is my energetic nature. I can't help it. However, I did not say anything, but started the packing. It seemed a longer job than I had thought it was going to be, but I got the bag finished at last and sat on it and strapped it. "Are you going to put the boots in?" said Harris, and I looked round and found I'd forgotten them. That's just like Harris. He could have said a word until I got the bag shut and strapped, of course. And George laughed. One of those irritating, senseless, chuckle-headed, crack-your laughs of his. They do make me so wild. I opened the bag and packed the boots in, and then, just as I was going to close it, a horrible idea occurred to me. Had I packed my toothbrush? I don't know how it is, but I never do know whether I've packed my toothbrush. My toothbrush is a thing that haunts me when I'm traveling and makes my life a misery. I dream that I haven't packed it and wake up in cold perception and get out of bed and hunt for it. And in the morning, I pack it before I've used it and have to unpack it again to get it. And it's always the last thing I turn out of the bag. And then I repack and forget it, and have to rush upstairs for it, and the last moment in carrying it to the railway station wrapped up in my pocket handkerchief. Of course, I had to turn every mortal thing out now, and, of course, I could not find it. I rummaged the things up until much the same state that they must have been before the world was created and where chaos reigned. Of course, I found George's and Harris's 18 times over, but I couldn't find my own. I put the things back one by one and held everything up and shook it. Then I found it inside a boot. I repacked once more. When I had finished, George asked if the soap was in. I said I didn't care whether the soap was in or whether it wasn't, and I slammed the bag to and strapped it, and found that I had packed my tobacco punch in it and had to reopen it. It got shut up finally at 10:05 p.m., and then there remained the hampers to do. Harry said that we should be wanting to start in less than 12 hours' time, and thought that he and George had better do the rest, and I agreed and sat down, and they had a go. They began in a light-hearted spirit, evidently intending to show me how to do it. I made no comment, I only waited. When George's hanked Harris will be worst packer in the world, and I looked at the piles of plates and cups and kettles and bottles and jars and pies and stoves and cakes and tomatoes, etc., and felt that the thing would soon become exciting. It did. They started with breaking a cup. That was the first thing they did. They did that just to show you what they could do and to get you interested. Then Harris packed a strawberry jam on top of a tomato and squashed it. And they had to pick out the tomato with a teaspoon. And then it was George's turn, and he trod on the butter. I didn't say anything, but I came over and sat on the edge of the table and watched them. It irritated them more than anything I could have said. I felt that. It made them nervous and excited, and they stepped on things and put things behind them, and they couldn't find them when they wanted them, and they packed the pies at the bottom and put heavy things on top and smashed the pies in. They upset salt over everything, and as for the butter, I never saw two men do more with 1 and 2 pence worth of butter in my whole life than they did. After George had got it off his slipper, they tried to put it in the kettle. It wouldn't go in, and that was in wouldn't come out. They did scrape it out at last and put it down on a chair, and Harris sat on it, and it stuck to him, and they went looking for it all over the room. I'll take my oath, I put it down on that chair, said George, staring at the empty seat. I saw you do it myself not a minute ago, said Harris. Then they stared round the room again looking for it, and then they met again in the center and stared at one another. Most extraordinary thing I ever heard of, said George. So mysterious, said Harris. Then George got round at the back of Harris and saw it. Why, here it is all the time, he explained indignantly. Where? Cried Harris, spinning round. Stand still, can't you? Roared George, flying after him, and they got it off and packed it in the teapot. Montmorency was in it all, of course. Montmorency's ambition in life is to get in the way and be sworn at. If he can squirm in anywhere where he particularly is not wanted, and be a perfect nuisance and make people mad and have things thrown at his head, then he feels his day has not been wasted. To get somebody to stumble over him and curse him steadily for an hour is his highest aim and object, and when he has succeeded in accomplishing this, his conceit becomes quite unbearable. He came and sat down on things, just when they were wanted to be packed, and he labored under the fixed belief that whenever Harris or George reached out their hand for anything, it was his cold damp nose that he wanted. He put his leg into the jam, and he borrowed the teaspoons, and he pretended that the lemons were rats, and got into the hamper and killed 3 of them before Harris could land him with a frying pan. Harris said I encouraged him. I didn't encourage him. A dog like that don't want any encouragement. It's the natural, original sin that is born in him that makes him do things like that. The packing was done at 12:50, and Harris sat on the big hamper and said he hoped nothing would be found broken. George said that if anything was broken, it was broken, which reflection seemed to comfort him. He also said he was ready for bed. We were all ready for bed. Harris was to sleep with us that night, and we went upstairs. We tossed for beds, and Harris had to sleep with me. He said, Do you prefer the inside or outside, Jay? I said I generally preferred to sleep inside a bed. Harry said it was old. George said, What time shall I wake you, fellas? Harry said, 7. I said, No, 6, because I wanted to write some letters. Harris and I had a bit of a row over it, but at last split the difference and said 6:30. Wake us up at 6:30, George, we said. George made no answer, and we found, on going over, that he had been asleep for some time. So we placed the bath where he could tumble into it on getting out in the morning, and went to bed ourselves. Hello, Zach. Are you enjoying yourselves, guys? I'm sorry about the voices. I'm experiencing this at the same time as you are. I love this. how are you, Zach? We are reading 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome Jerome. Chapter 5. I'm glad, Zach. That's what it says in the book right here. It was Mrs. Poppets that woke me up next morning. She said, "Do you know that it's nearly 9 o'clock, sir?" 9 what? I cried, startling up. 9 o'clock, she replied through the keyhole. I thought you wasn't oversleeping yourselves. I woke Harris and told him. He said, I thought you wanted me to get up at 6. So I did, I answered. Why didn't you wake me? Why didn't you wake me? He retorted. Now we shan't get on the water till after 12. I wonder you take the trouble to get up at all. I replied, lucky for you that I do. If I hadn't woken you, you'd been laying there for the whole fortnight. We snarled at one another in this strain for the next few minutes when we were interrupted by a defiant snore from George. It reminded us, for the first time since our being called, of his existence. There he lay, the man who had wanted to know what time he should wake us, on his back, with his mouth wide open and his knees stuck up. I don't know why it should be, I am sure, but the sight of another man asleep in bed when I am up maddens me. It seems to me so shocking to see the precious hours of a man's life, the priceless moments that will never come back to him again, being wasted in mere brutish sleep. There was George, throwing away in hideous sloth the inestimable gift of time, his valuable life, every second of which he would have been accounted for hereafter, passing away from him unseen. He might have been up stuffing himself with eggs and bacon, irritating the dog or flirting with the lady, instead of sprawling there, sunk in soul-clocking oblivion. It was a terrible thought. Harris and I appeared to be struck by it at the same instant. We determined to save him, and in this noble resolve, our own dispute was forgotten. We flew across and slung the clothes off him, and Harris landed him one with a slipper, and I shouted in his ear, and he awoke. "Wasn't moron," he observed, sitting up. "Get up, you fat-headed junk," roared Harris. "It's 10:15. "What?" he shrieked, jumping out of bed into the bath. "Who'd put a thing in here?" We told him he must have been a fool not to see the bath. We finished dressing, and when it came to the extras, we remembered that we had packed the toothbrushes and the brush and comb. That toothbrush of mine will be the death of me, I know. And we had to go downstairs and fish them out the back. And when we had done that, George wanted the shaving tackle. We told him that he would have to go without shaving that morning, as we weren't going to unpack the bag again for him, nor for anyone like him. He said, "Don't be absurd. How can I go into the city like this?" He was certainly rather tough on the city, but what cared we for human suffering? As Harry said in his common, vulgar way, the city would have to love it. We went downstairs to breakfast. Montmorency had invited 2 other dogs to come and see him off, and they were whiling away the time by fighting on the doorstep. We calmed them with an umbrella and sat down to chops and cold beef. Harry said, "The great thing is to make a good breakfast," and he started with a couple of chops, saying that he would take these while they were hot, as the beef could wait. George got hold of the paper and read us out the boating fatalities and the weather forecast, which later proposed rain, cold, wet to fine. Whatever more than usually ghastly thinking whether that may be, occasional local thunderstorms, east winds with general depression over the Midland counties, London and Channel, bar falling. I do think that all of the silly, irritating tomfoolness by which we are plagued, this weather forecast fraud, is about the most aggravating. It forecasts precisely what happened yesterday or the day before, and precisely the opposite of what is going to happen today. I remember a holiday of mine being completely ruined one late autumn by our paying attention to the weather report or the local newspaper. Heavy showers with thunderstorms may be expected today, it would say on Monday. And so we would give up on our picnic and stoop indoors all day waiting for the rain. And the people who would pass the house, going off in bag nets and coaches and jolly and merry as could be, the sun shining out, and not a cloud to see. Ah, we said, as we stood looking at them through the window. Won't they come home soaked? And we chuckled to think how wet they were going to be, and came back as stirred the fire and got our books and arranged our specimens of seaweed and shark shells. By 12 o'clock, with the sun pouring into the room, the heat became quite oppressive, and we wondered when those heavy showers and occasional thunderstorms were going to begin. Ah, they'll come in the afternoon, you find, we said to one another. Oh, won't those people get wet? What a lark! At 1 o'clock, the landlady came in to ask if we weren't going out, as it seemed such a lovely day. No, no, we replied with a knowing chuckle. No, not we. We don't mean to get wet. No, no. And then the afternoon was nearly gone, and still there was no sign of rain. We tried to cheer ourselves up with the idea that it would come down all at once, just as people had started for home and were out of reach of any shelter, and that they would thus get more drenched than ever. But not a drop ever fell, and it finished a grand day and a lovely night after it. The next morning we would read that it was going to be a warm, fine to set-fed day, much heat, and we would dress ourselves in flimsy things and go out. And half an hour after we'd started, it would commence to rain hard, and a bitterly cold wind would spring up, and both would keep on steady for the whole day. And we would come home with colds and rheumatism all over us and go to bed. The weather is a thing that is beyond me altogether. I never can understand it. The barometer is useless. It's as misleading as the newspaper forecast. There was one hanging up in a hotel at Oxford at which I was staying last spring. And when I got there, it was pointing to set fair. It was simply pouring with the rain outside, and had been all day, and I couldn't quite make matters out. I tapped the barometer, and it jumped up and pointed to very dry. The boots stopped that he was passing and said he expected to mend tomorrow. I fancied that maybe he was thinking of the week before last, but Boots said no, he thought not. I tapped it again the next morning, and it went up to still higher, and the rain came down faster than ever. On Wednesday, I went and hit it again, and the pointer went round towards set fair, very dry and much heat, until it was stopped by the peg and couldn't go any further. It tried its best, but the instrument was built so that it couldn't profusely find weather any harder than it did without breaking itself. It evidently wanted to go on and prognosticate drought and water famine and sunstroke and Simmons and such things, but the peg prevented it, and it had to be very content with pointing to the mere commonplace, very dry. Meanwhile, the rain came down in a steady torrent, and the lower part of town was under water, owing to the river having overflowed. Booth said it was evident that they were going to have a prolonged spell of grand weather sometime, and read out a poem which was printed over the top of the oracle about long foretold, long past, short notice, soon pass. The fine weather never came that summer. I expect that machine must have been referring to the following spring. Then there are those new style of barometers, those long straight ones. I never can make head or tail of those. There is one side for 10 a.m. yesterday and one side for 10 a.m. today, but you can't always get there as early as 10, you know? It rises or falls for rain and fine, with much or less wind, and one end is NLY and the other ELY. What's Eli got to do with it? And if you tap it, it doesn't tell you anything. And you got to correct it to sea level and reduce it to Fahrenheit, and even then, I don't know the answer. But who wants to be foretold the weather? It is bad enough when it comes, without our having the mystery of knowing about it beforehand. The prophet we like is the old man who, on the particularly gloomy-looking morning of some day when we particularly want it to be fine, looks round the horizon with a particularly knowing eye and says, "Oh no, sir. I think it will clear up all right. It will break all right enough, sir." Ah, he knows, we say, as we wish him good morning and start off. Wonderful how these old fellows can tell. And we feel an affection for that man, which is not at all lessened by the circumstances of it not clearing up, but continuing to rain steadily all day. Ah, well, we feel he did his best. For the man that prophesies bad weather, on the contrary, we entertain only bitter and revengeful thoughts. "Going to clear up, do you think?" we shout cheerily as we pass. "Well, no, sir. I'm afraid it's settling down for the day," he replies, shaking his head. "Stupid old fool," we mutter. "What he know about it?" And if he portends proves correct, we come back feeling still more angry against him, and with a vague notion that somehow or another he has had something to do with it. It was too bright and sunny on this especially morning for George's blood-curdling readings about bar falling, atmospheric disturbance, passing in a blind line over southern Europe, and pressure increasing, to very much upset us. And so, finding that he could not make us wretched, and was only wasting his time, he sneaked a cigarette that I had carefully rolled up for myself, and went. Then Harris and I, having finished up the few things left on the table, carted out our luggage on the top to the doorstep and waited for a cab. There seemed a good deal of luggage when we put it all together. There was a Gladstone and a small handbag, and the 2 hampers, and a large roll of rugs, and some 4 or 5 overcoats and mackintosh, a few umbrellas, and then there was a melon by itself in a bag, because it was too bulky to go anywhere, and a couple of pounds of grapes in another bag, and a Japanese paper umbrella and a frying pan which, being too long to pack, we had wrapped around with brown paper. It did look a lot, and Harris and I began to feel rather ashamed of it, though why we should be, I can't see. No cab came by, but the street boys did and got interested in the show, apparently, and stopped. Big's boy was the first to come round. Biggs is a greengrocer, and his chief talent lies in securing the services of the most abandoned and unprincipled errand boys that civilization has yet to produce. If anything more than usually villainous in the boyland crops up in our neighborhood, we know that it's Big's latest. I was told that at the time of the Great Coram Street murder, it was promptly concluded by our street that Big's boys, for that period, was at the bottom of it, and he had not been able, in reply to the severe cross-examination to which he was subjected by number 19, when he called there for orders the morning after the crime, assisted by number 21, who happened to be on the step at the time, to prove a complete alibi. It would have gone hard for him. I didn't know Big's boy at the time, but from what I've seen of them since, I should not have attached much importance to that alibi myself. Big's boy, as I've said, came round the corner. He was evidently in a great hurry when he first dawned upon the vision, but on catching sight of Harris and me, and Montmorency, and the things, he eased up and stared. Harris and I frowned at him. This might have wounded a more sensitive nature, but Big's boys are not, as a rule, touchy. He came to a dead stop, a yard from our step, and, leaning up against the railing and selecting a straw to chew, fixed us with his eye. He evidently meant to see these things out. In another moment, the grocer's boy passed on the opposite side of the street. Big's boy hailed him. "Aye! Get on floor, boy, two's a moving!" The grocer's boy came across and took up a position on the other side of the step. Then the young gentleman from the boot shop stopped and joined Big's boy, while the empty can superintendent from the Blue Posts took up an independent position on the curb. "They are going to stop, are they?" said the gentleman from the boot shop. "You want to take a thing or two with you," retorted the Blue Post. "If you were going across the Atlantic in a small boat." "I ain't going across the Atlantic," struck in Big's boy. "They're going to find Stanley." By this time, quite a small crowd had collected, and people were asking each other what was the matter. One party, the young and giddy portion of the crowd, hailed that it was a wedding, and pointed out Harris as the bridegroom, while the elder and more thoughtful among the populace inclined to the idea that it was a funeral, and that I was probably the corpse's brother. At last, an empty cab turned up. It is a street where, as a rule, and when they are not wanted, empty cabs pass at the rate of 3 a minute. Hang about and get in your way. And packing ourselves and our belongings into it, and shouting out a couple of Montemore's friends, who had evidently sworn never to forsake him, we drove away amidst the cheers of the crowd, Big's boy shying a carrot after us for luck. We got to Waterloo at 11, and asked where the 11.5 started from. Of course, nobody knew. Nobody at Waterloo ever does know when a train is going to start from, or when a train, when it does start, is going to, or anything about it. The porter who took our things thought it would go from number 2 platform, while another porter, with whom he discussed the question, had heard a rumor that it would go from number 1. The stations master, on the other hand, was convinced it would start from the local. To put an end to the matter, we went upstairs and asked the traffic superintendent, and he told us that he had just met a man who'd said that he'd seen it at a number 3 platform. We went to number 3 platform, but the authorities there said that they rather thought the train was Southampton Express or else the Windsor Loop. But they were sure it wasn't the Kingston train, though they were sure it wasn't, they couldn't say. Then our porter said he thought that it must be it on the high level platform, said he thought he knew the train. So we went to the high level platform and saw the engine driver and asked him if he was going to Kingston. He said he couldn't say for certain, of course, but that he had rather thought he was. Anyhow, if he wasn't the 11.5 for Kingston, he said, was pretty confident he was the 9.32 for Virginia Water, or the 10 a.m. express for the Isle of Wight, or somewhere in that direction, and we should all know when we got there. We slipped half a crown into his hand and begged him to be the 11.5 for Kingston. Nobody will ever know on this line, we said, what you are or where you're going. You know the way. You slip off quietly and go to Kingston. Well, I don't know, gents, replied the noble fellow, but I suppose some trains got to go to Kingston, and I'll do it. Give me half a crown. Thus we got to Kingston before the London and South Western Railway. We learned afterwards that the train we had come by was really the Exeter Mail, and that they had spent hours at Waterloo looking for it, and nobody knew what had become of it. Our boat was waiting for us at Kingston, just below the bridge, and to it we wended our way, and round it we stored our luggage, and into it we stepped. "Are you right, sir?" said the man. "Right is," we answered, and with Harris at the sculls and I at the tiller lines and Montmorency, unhappy and deeply suspicious in the prow, out we shot onto the waters which, for a fortnight, were to be our home. Oh boy, I'm really red in the face. I don't know what happened. It's okay. How are you doing, guys? Free is unhappy to hear about cheese. It is difficult to it is a bit difficult to read, since I'm reading it for the first time as well. But it is quite funny at times, yeah. You can see why it's been so appreciated over the years. I will continue. One more chapter. We are at chapter 6. It was a glorious morning, late spring or early summer, as you care to take it, when the dainty sheen of grass and leaf is blushing to a deeper green, and the year seems like a fair young maid, trembling with strange wakening pulses on the brink of womanhood. The quaint back streets of Kingston, where they came down to the water's edge, looked quite picturesque in the flushing sunlight. The glinting river with its drifting barges, the wooded toothpath, the trim-kept villas on the other side, Harris in a red and orange blazer grunting away at the sculls, the distant glimpses of the grey old palace of the Tudors, all made a sunny picture, so bright but calm, so full of life, and yet so peaceful, that early in the day, though it was, I felt myself being dreamily lulled off into a musing fit. I mused on Kingston, or Kingston, as it was once called in the days when Saxon kings were crowned there. Great Caesar crossed the river there, and the Roman legions camped upon its sloping uplands. Caesar, like in later years Elizabeth, seemed to have stopped everywhere. Only he was more respectable than good Queen Bess. He didn't put up at the public houses. She was nuts on public homes, was England's Virgin Queen. There's scarcely a pub of any attractions within 10 miles of London that she does not seem to have looked in at, or stopped at, or slept at some time or another. I wonder now, supposing Harry, say, turning over a new leaf and becoming a great and good man and got to be Prime Minister and died, if they would put up signs over the public houses that he had patronized. Harry's had a glass of bitter in this house. Harry's had 2 of Scotch cold here in December of 88. Harry's were chocolate from here in December 1886. No, there would be too many of them. It would be the houses that he had never entered, that would become famous. Only house in South London that Harry's never had a drink in. People would flock to it to see what would have been the matter with it. How poor, weak-minded King Edwin must have hated Kingston. The coronation feast had been too much for him. Maybe boar's head stuffed with sugar plums did not agree with him. It wouldn't with me, I know. And he had had enough of sack and mead, so he slipped from the noisy revel to steal a quiet moonlight hour with his beloved Algiva. Perhaps from the casement, standing hand in hand, they were watching the calm moonlight on the river, while from the distant halls the boisterous reveille floated in broken bursts of faint-hearted din and tumult. Then brutal Odo and St. Dunstan forced their rude way into the quiet room and hurled coarse insults at the sweet-faced queen, and dragged poor Edwy back to the loud clamour of the drunken brawl. Years later, to the crash of battle music, Saxon kings and Saxon revelry were buried side by side, and Kingston's greatness passed away for a time, to rise once more when Hampton Court became the palace of the Tudors and the Stuarts, and the royal barges strained at the moorings on the river's bank, and bright-cloaked gallants swaggered down the water steps to cry, "What a ferry, ho! Gadswood's Gramercy!" Many of the old houses round about speak very plainly of those days when Kingston was a royal borough, and nobles and courtiers lived there, near the king, and the long road to the palace's gates were gay all day with clanking steel and prancing palfreys and rustling silks and velvets and fair faces. The large and spacious houses with the oriel lattices window, the huge fireplaces and the gable roofs breathed of the days of hose and doublet, of pale and bright summers and complicated oaths. They were upraised in these days when men knew how to build. The hard red bricks have only grown more firmly set with time, and the oak stairs do not creak and grunt when you try to go down them quietly. Speaking of oak staircases reminds me that there is a magnificent carved oak staircase in one of the houses in Kingston. It is a shop now in the marketplace, but it was evidently once the mansion of some great personage. A friend of mine who lives at Kingston went in there to buy a hat one day, and in a thoughtless moment put his hand in his pocket and paid for it then and there. The shopman, who he knows my friend, was naturally a little staggered at first, but quickly recovered himself, and feeling that something ought to be done to encourage his sort of thing, asked our hero if he would like to see some fine old carved oak. My friend said he would, and the shopman thereupon took him through the shop and up the staircase of the house. The balusters were a superb piece of workmanship, and the wall all the way up was oak panelled, with carving that would have done credit to a palace. From the stairs they went into the drawing room, which was a large, bright room decorated with a somewhat startling though cheerful paper of blue ground. There was nothing, however, remarkable about the apartment, and my friend wondered why he had been brought there. The proprietor went up to the paper and tapped it. It gave forth a wooden sound. Oak, he explained. All carved oak, right up to the ceiling, just the same as you saw on the staircase. But great Caesar, man, exploded my friend. You don't mean to say you covered over the carved oak with blue wallpaper? Yeah, was the reply. It was expensive work. Had to matchboard it all over first, of course. But the room looks cheerful now. It was awfully gloomy before. I can't say I altogether blame the man, which is doubtless a great relief to his mind, from his point of view, which would be that the average householder, desiring to take life as lightly as possible and not that of the old curiosity shop maniac, there is reason on his side. Carved oak is very pleasant to look at and to have a little of, but it is no doubt somewhat depressing to live in for those whose fancy does not lie that way. It would be like living in a church. No, what he was sad in this case was that he, who didn't care for carved oak, would have his drawing room paneled with it, while people who do care for it have to pay enormous prices to get it. It seemed to be the rule of this world. Each person has what he doesn't want, and other people have what he does want. Married men have wives and don't seem to want them, and young single fellows cry out that they can't get them. Poor people who can hardly keep themselves have 8 hearty children. Rich old couples with no one to leave their money to die childless. Then there are girls with lovers. The girls that have lovers never want them. They say they would rather be without them, that they bothered them, and why don't they go and make love to Miss Smith and Miss Brown, who are plain and elderly and haven't got any lovers? They themselves don't want lovers. They never mean to marry. It does not do to dwell on these things, it makes one so sad. There was a boy at our school. We used to call him Sanford and Merton. His real name was Sivings. He was the most extraordinary lad I ever came across. I believe he really liked study. He used to get into awful rows for sitting up in bed and reading Greek, and as for French irregular verbs, there was simply no keeping him away from them. He was full of weird and unnatural notions about being a credit to his parents and an honor to the school, and he yearned to win prizes and grow up and be a clever man, and had all those sorts of weak-minded ideas. I never knew such a strange creature, yet harmless, mind you, as the babe unborn. Well, that boy used to get ill about twice a week, so that he couldn't go to school. There never was such a boy to get ill as that Sandford and Merton. If there was any known disease going within 10 miles of him, he had it, and he had it badly. He would take bronchs in the dog days and have hay fever at Christmas. After a 6 weeks period of drought, he would be stricken down with rheumatic fever, and he would go out in November fog and come home with a sunstroke. They put him under the laughing gas. They put him under the laughing gas one year. Language gas. Laughing gas one year, poor lad, and drew all his teeth and gave him a false set because he suffered so terribly with toothache, and then he turned to neuralgia and earache. He was never without a cold, except once for 9 weeks while he had scarlet fever, and he always had chameleons. During the Great Cholera Scare of 1871, our neighborhood was singularly free from it. There was only one reputed case in the whole parish. That case was young Stivings. He had to stop in bed while he was ill and eat chicken and custards and hot ghost grapes, and he would lie there and sob because they wouldn't let him do Latin exercises and took his German grammar away from him. And we other boys, who would have sacrificed 10 terms of our school life for the sake of being ill for a day, and had no desire whatever to give our parents any excuse for being stuck up about us, couldn't catch as much as a stiff neck. We fooled about in draughts, and it did us good and freshened us up, and we took things to make us sick, and they made us fat and gave us an appetite. Nothing we could think of seemed to make us ill until the holidays began. Then, on the breaking up day, we caught colds and whooping cough and all kinds of disorders, which lasted till the term recommenced, when, in spite of everything we could maneuver to the contrary, we would get suddenly well again and be better than ever. Such is life, and we are but a grass that is cut down and put into the oven and baked. To go back to the carved oak question, they must have had very fair notions of the artistic and the beautiful, our great-great-grandfathers. Why all our art treasures of today are only the dug-up commonplaces of 300 or 400 years ago? I wonder if there is any real intrinsic beauty in the old soup plates, beer mugs, and candle snuffers that were prized so now, or if it's only the halo of age glowing around them that gives them the charms in our eyes. The old blue that we hang about our walls as ornaments were the common everyday household utensils of a few centuries ago. And the pink shepherds and the yellow shepherdess that we hand round now for all our friends to gush over and pretend they understand were the unvalued mantle ornaments that the mother of the 18th century would have given the baby to suck when he cried. Will it be the same in the future? Will the prized treasures of today always be the cheap trifles of the day before? Will rows of our willow-patterned dinner plates be ranged about the chimney pieces of the grate in the years 2000 and odd? Will the white cups with a cold rim and the beautiful gold flower inside, species unknown, that our Sarah Janes now break in sheer lightheartedness of spirit, be carefully mended and stood but on a bracket and dusted only by the lady of the house? That china dog that ornaments the bedroom of my furnished lodgings. It's a white dog. Its eyes are blue. Its nose is delicate red with black spots. Its head is painfully erect, and its expression is amiably carried to the verge of imbecility. I do not admire it myself. Considered as a work of art, I may say it irritates me. Thoughtless friends jeer at it, and even my landlady herself has no admiration for it, and excuses its presence by the circumstances that her aunt gave it to her. But in 200 years' time, it is more than probable that the dog will be dug up from somewhere or other, minus its legs, and with its tail broken, and will be sold for old china and put in a glass cabinet. And people will pass it round and admire it. They will be struck by the wonderful depth of the color of the nose, and speculate as to how beautiful the bit of the tail that is lost no doubt was. Well, in this age, do not see the beauty of that dog. We are too familiar with it. It is like the sunset and the stars. We are not awed by the loneliness because they are common to our eyes. So it is that china dog. In 2288, people will gush over it. The making of such dogs will have become a lost art. Our descendants will wonder how we did it and say how clever we were. We shall be referred to lovingly as those grand old artists that flourished in the 19th century and produced those china dogs. Hello. Jarek. Welcome in, love. Welcome to the little corner. The sampler that the eldest daughter did at school will be spoken up as tapestry of the Victorian era, and be almost priceless. The blue and white mugs of the present-day roadside inn will be haunted up and cracked and chipped and sold for their weight in gold, and rich people will use them for claret cups, and travelers from Japan will buy up the presents from Ramsgate and souvenirs of Margate that may have escaped destruction and take them back to Jido as ancient English curios. At this point, Harry threw away the skulls, got up and left his seat, and sat on his back and stuck his legs in the air. Montmorency howled and turned a somersault, and the top hamper jumped up, and all the things came out. I was somewhat surprised, but I did not lose my temper. I said, pleasantly enough, "Or, what's that for?" "What's that for what?" No. On second thoughts, I will not repeat what Harry said. I may have been to blame, I admit it, but nothing excuses violence of language and coarseness of expression, especially in a man who has been carefully brought up, as I know Harry's has been. I was thinking of other things and forgot, as anyone might easily understand, that I was steering. And the consequence that we had got mixed up a good deal, the consequence with the tow path. It was difficult to say for the moment which was us and which was the Middlesex back of the river. But we found out after a while and separated ourselves. Harris, however, said he had done enough for a bit and proposed that I should take a turn. So, as we were in, I got out and took the tow line and ran the boat on past Hampton Court. What a dear old wall that is that runs along the river there. I never passed it without feeling better for the sight of it. Such a mellow, bright, sweet old wall. What a charming picture it would make with the Lytton creeping here and the moss growing there, a shy young vine peeping over the top of this spot to see what is going upon the busy river, and the sober old ivy clustering a little further down. There are 50 shades and tints and hues in every 10 yards of that old wall. If I could only draw and knew how to paint, I could make a lovely sketch of that old wall, I'm sure. I've often thought I should like to live at Hampton Court. It looks so peaceful and so quiet, and it's such a dear old place to ramble around in the early morning before many people are about. But there, I don't suppose I could really care for it when it came to actual practice. It will be so ghastly dull and depressing in the evening, when your lamp cast uncanny shadows on the panel wall and the echo of distant feet rang through the cold stone corridors, and now drew nearer. And now died away, and all was death-like silence, save the beating of one's own heart. We are creatures of the sun, we men and women. We love light and life. This is why we crowd into the towns and cities, and the country grows more and more deserted every year. In the sunlight, in daytime, when nature is alive and busy all around us, we like the open hillsides and the deep woods well enough. But in the night, when our Mother Earth has gone to sleep and left us waking, the world seems so lonesome, and we get frightened like children in a silent house. Then we sit and sob and long for the gaslit light streets and the sound of human voices and the answering throb of human life. We feel so helpless and so little in the great stillness when the dark trees rustles in the night wind. There are so many ghosts about, and their silent sigh make us feel so sad. Let us gather together in the great cities and light huge bonfires of million gas jets and shout and sing together and feel brave. Harris asked me if I'd ever been in the maze of Hampton Court. He said he went in once to show someone else the way. He had studied it up on a map, and it was so simple that it seemed foolish, hardly worth the 2 pence charge for the mission. Harry said he thought that map must have been got up as a practical joke, because it wasn't a bit like the real thing, and only misleading. It was a country cousin that Harris took in. He said, "We just go in there so that you can say you've been, but it's very simple. It's absurd to call it a maze. You keep on taking the first turning to the right, or just walk around for 10 minutes and then go and get some lunch." They met some people soon after they got inside who said they'd been there for 3/4 of an hour and had had about enough of it. Harris told them they could follow him if they liked. He was just going in and they should turn around and come out again. They said it was very kind of him and fell behind and followed. They picked up various other people who wanted to get it over as they went along until they absorbed all the persons in the maze. People who had given up all hopes of ever getting either in or out, or of ever seeing their home and friends again, plucked up courage at the sight of Harris and his party and joined the procession, blessing him. Harry said he should judge there must have been 20 people following him in all, and one woman with a baby who had been there all morning insisted on taking his arm for fear of losing him. Harry kept on turning to the right, but it seemed a long way, and his cousin said he supposed it was a very big maze. "Oh, one in the largest in Europe," said Harris. "Yeah, it must be," replied the cousin, "'cause we've been walked a good 2 miles already." Harris began to think it rather strange himself, but he held on until, at last, they passed a half-a-penny bun on the ground that Harry's cousin swore he had noticed there 7 minutes ago. Harry said, "Oh, impossible." But the woman with the baby said, "Not at all," as she herself had taken it from the child and thrown it down there just before she met Harris. She also added that she wishes she never had met Harris and expressed an opinion that he was an imposter. That made Harris mad, and he produced his map and explained his theory. That map may be all well right enough," said one of the party, "if you know whereabouts in it we are now." Harris didn't know, and suggested that the best thing to do would be to go back to the entrance and begin again. For the beginning again part of it, there was not much enthusiasm, but with regard to the adversely going back to the entrance, there were complete anonymity, so they turned and trailed after Harris again in the opposite direction. About 10 minutes more passed, and they found themselves in the center. Harris thought at first of pretending that that was what he had been aiming at, but the crowd looked dangerous, and he decided to treat it as an accident. Anyhow, they had got something to start from then. They did know where they were, and the map was once more consulted, and the thing seemed simpler than ever, and off they started for the 3rd time. And 3 minutes later, they were back in the center again. After that, they simply couldn't go anywhere else. Whatever way they turned brought them back to the middle. It became so regular at length that some of the people stopped there and waited for the others to take a walk around and come back to them. Harris drew out his map again after a while, but the sight of it only infuriated the mob, and they told him to go and curl his hair with it. Harry said that he couldn't help feeling that, to a certain extent, he had become unpopular. They all got crazy at last and sang out for the keeper, and a man came and climbed up the ladder outside and shouted out directions to them. But all their heads were, by this time, in such a confused whirl that they were incapable of grasping anything. So the man told them to stop where they were, and he would come to them. They huddled together and waited, and he climbed down and came in. He was a young keeper, as luck would have it, and new to the business, and when he got in, he couldn't get to them, and then he got lost. They caught sight of him every now and then, rushing about the other side of the hedge, and he would see them and rush to get them, and they would wait there for about 5 minutes, and then he would reappear again in exactly the same spot and ask them where they had been. They had to wait until one of the old keepers came back from his dinner before they got out. Harry said he thought it was a very fine maze, so far as he was a judge, and we agreed that we would try to get George to go into it on our way back. Thank you, Jared. I'm glad you're enjoying. This was chapter 6. I hope you have enjoyed it thus far. I feel I would like to open up the room for some healing and just some singing bowl. Just some beautiful healing before we go today. I really enjoyed these small little streams. For you who are new, every Friday we have a longer stream where we work with healing and energy transferences. You're more than welcome to join us then. I only know English, Jarek. So if you say it in English, I can say it in Swedish. It's beautiful,